The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everybody. We're going to start in a minute or two. Lots of people are still joining, so we'll just give it a few more seconds and then we'll kick off. And thank you for joining. We're just going to leave it a few more seconds and then we'll kick off because the numbers are still ticking up quite healthily. Okay, Adriana, as we tick up towards the 100 mark, I think we should probably start.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Sam Thomas from the Regulatory Assistance Project, one of the consortium partners on the Horizon 2020 ENSMOV project. And I'd like to welcome you to this ENSMOV webinar, on which I will be joined by a great panel, which I'll introduce shortly, to discuss the EU Commission's new proposals for the Energy Efficiency Directive Energy Savings Obligation. Now, this is an important moment for EU climate and energy policy. Member states have agreed a more ambitious net 55% climate target for 2030, and the Commission has proposed a wide-ranging set of measures to meet that target, including a new emissions trading system for buildings and road transport. And the proposals demand a much faster rate of decarbonisation in those sectors in particular than we've seen over the last decade, while also aiming to ensure that those emissions reductions are achieved in a fair way, paying attention to energy poverty, vulnerable and low-income households. So energy efficiency policies really hold the key to achieving these goals, which is where the Energy Efficiency Directive Energy Savings Obligations fits into the picture. It requires member states to make energy savings from policy measures. So at this auspicious moment, I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of distinguished speakers to explain, assess, and take your questions on the proposals for the energy savings obligation, which was published only in July this year. Now, the session is going to proceed as follows. In a moment, I'm going to ask our project coordinator, Blasis Oikonomou from IECP, to introduce the ENSMOG project. Secondly, we're going to move on to our main presentation from Anna Katarina Weidenbach, who's a policy officer at the EU Commission leading on this file. After the presentation, we're going to move to our panel discussion. We're going to start the panel discussion with 3 5-minute interventions, so responses from our panel members. And those panel members are Ariana Vitali, Secretary General at the Coalition for Energy Savings, Maureen Cornelis, Executive Director at Next Energy Consumer, and Peter Bach, Chair of the IEA Energy Efficiency Working Party, and also the former President of ECEEE Peter will be speaking in a personal capacity. I think we've got a great panel there, really covering the policy, industry and consumer angles. So I'm really looking forward to our discussion. When we move to the Q&A, I'll have a couple of questions up my sleeve to kick off the discussion, but really we want to take your questions. And you'll see, hopefully, in the sidebar on this application that there's a question box. So please type your questions into that, and I will do my best to ensure that they get asked to our panel in the second half of the webinar. So without further ado, I'd like to kick off and hand the floor to Vlasis, who will give a brief introduction to the Entsmog project.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sam, for the introduction. I will go through the Entsmog project so we all understand where the whole discussion is based on. Just complementing to what Sam said, indeed, this webinar happens at a very timely manner, given that we have this peak of electricity prices happening everywhere in the EU now. And we see that most member states, the policies they made are mainly subsidization policies, while energy efficiency needs should at least be part of the agenda now for combating this peak of electricity prices and alleviating the higher electricity and energy costs for consumers. So the Entsmog project, going back, the full title of the project is Enhancing the Implementation, Monitoring and Verification Practices of Energy Saving Policy under the Article 7 of the ED. It's a European Commission funded project finishing in probably in the end of 2022 with some extension. The main objectives here is, first of all, is to facilitate and expand the knowledge sharing and experience among the member states for implementing. So the first aspect has to do with the implementation of the policies. We have checked what has happened, what will happen, what is being declared in the NECP, and how these policies will have an impact in the future. The second one is we are developing a tailored resources and tools for implementing to address specific needs. So this is not a desk research, it's a pure on-field work with member states. We get requests from member states to receive support on specific elements of the monitoring and verification aspects, but also on the policy implementation aspects. And there we try to customize tools and help them with implementation. And the last one is to assist the development of new MRV schemes. We know that most of the MRV schemes have been working to some extent, or to a lesser or to more extent, in some member states in the previous period, 2014-2020, but with a new period, more support is required to come up to robust schemes, and of course to help them redesign the policy 2030. These are the partners. The partnership consists of several, it's a mix of agencies, universities, and research centers, and we have a broad coverage in all the EU and all the member states. The background is it comes from two known projects. It was the ENSMOV and the multi project. Both were working on the Article 7 back in the first period of the Article 7. And how we are operating is mainly we operate with a series of exchanges with member states in smaller or larger groups or larger events like the today's one. And we focus on specific elements which I'll just briefly show. The whole debate started from needs assessments that we carried out in member states to understand what the real problems in the implementation of the Article 7 were. And here you can just get some feeling on it was always the sustainability of the schemes from the first to the second period, political support for new schemes, be it EOs or other energy efficiency obligation schemes or other types of measures, how these measures can be complementary. This was a big gap in all the knowledge of the policymaker, and of course the policy budget commitments. And likewise, the most important of the MRV parts were the difficulty of the data. These are the standard MRV difficulties, the baseline settings, understaffed, and complexity of the requirements. The program is structured in cycles. The first cycle has already been finished, and here you can see some of the, actually these were the elements that we dealt with in specific workshops, webinars, exchanges. You can find all the materials that we have. It was on cost effectiveness of Article 7 ED policies, the basics on MRV, financial aspects on how to finance the obligation schemes, where the idea is that we don't teach, but we rather exchange between the member states. We get the best practices that member states have used so that others can get inspiration. And now what we are in the second cycle, this is the event, you can see the highlight today, and we also have a series like the side effects of the Oswald alternatives. It will take place in October, November, IT tools for MRV, additionality, materiality practices, and we have then energy efficiency fund, how to operate an EF, get examples from Spain and the other countries. Banking and borrowing rules, ESCOs, how they work, and then other stuff on the business models, financing under regulated prices, regulatory changes, and declining rate of energy savings. So we try to capture this within 2021. It's going to be a lot of topics, but we are moving on to a good direction. And then one of the most important outputs, which I would like you to spend some time, is just click on the link below, this article7ed.eu. It's a platform generated, it's already 5 years platform, and it gathers all the knowledge on the Article 7. Of course, now probably it will be renamed due to the new article, but nevertheless, that's the idea, and it has all the information, all the exchanges. You can find information per country based on what member states have declared in their annual reportings, but also what are the best instruments to be used, covering specific elements and specific needs of member states. And here, of course, ads for us. You can log in the sites, click on our link, and follow us in the group. Thank you very much for the time, and I'm looking forward to this very, very interesting debate today.
Thank you, Blasis. And just to say that we have a number of events coming up at which we can share knowledge and hopefully improve policy making in the Entsmog cycle. If you happen to be at the C4E Forum, which is coming up next week, we're doing an event with the Social Watch Horizon 2020 project on how to deliver energy poverty, energy savings in energy poor households through energy efficiency obligations. And the week after, we're having a session on how to design energy efficiency auctions, which will be online and hosted by FERE, our Italian consortium partner. So if you're interested in any of these aspects about how to actually design and monitor and verify energy efficiency policies, then please have a look on our website and join our sessions. Right, so look, on to the meat of today's webinar, which is on the new proposals for the EED. And I would like to hand over now to Anna Katerina, who will explain what's in the proposals for Article 7, now Article 8.
Yes, good morning, everyone, and good morning, Sam. Thanks a lot for inviting me to attend this meeting. My aim is to guide you briefly through the main elements of the revised energy savings obligation and to hopefully contribute to a fruitful and lively discussion afterwards. I'm also happy to listen to the interventions. I'm very much interested because now it's the time also to gather feedback from various stakeholders and to answer questions in case the legal proposal is not totally clear to everyone. So maybe we can start with the first slide. And thanks a lot for your assistance. Just from the starting point, you know, on 14th of July, the Commission adopted the proposal for revised Energy Efficiency Directive, which is part of the Fit for 55 package. We put a lot of focus to have a holistic approach to assess synergies. We had many meetings and task forces to ensure that we create the synergies needed to meet the targets. What was our objective? We were starting, of course, from the European Green Deal and then also from the impact assessment of the Climate Target Plan. And it was clear that we need to unlock the energy savings potential which had been identified. Of course, another point and also important for the new energy savings obligation was the ambition required to contribute to the decarbonization target identified in the Climate Target Plan. So this was, let's say, the starting point for everything, which is the 55% in 2030. And of course, then to provide member states with the measures they might need to be able to contribute to the decarbonization target and the energy efficiency target. So what are the main elements? I try to highlight this in the next slide, please. So we have now in Article 4 formerly Article 3, the new energy efficiency target. It's new that it's a binding target, and it's complemented by the requirement to have indicative national contributions going back to back with a formula to calculate or a benchmark to calculate the required national contribution. Then we added an article to, let's say, to have a legal basis for the application of the energy efficiency first principle. We strengthened the energy savings obligation since we identified huge potential in the public sector. We also focus a lot on the exemplary role of the public sector. And finally, as Sam already mentioned, the European Green Deal made it clear that we need a just and inclusive transition. That's why we also strengthened the focus of the Energy Efficiency Directive towards energy poverty, the alleviation of energy poverty, and the protection and empowerment of vulnerable customers. Next slide, please. So what are the main elements of the energy savings obligation? So as said, we had a codification and amendment of the Energy Efficiency Directive. That's why now Article 7 turned to Article 8. We maintain the obligation to achieve new energy savings each year. So, but the savings rate we proposed increased from 0.8 from 1.5% for all member states. What remained is that we will retain the flexibility regarding the choice of measures. So there's no change. Energy savings can be achieved by energy efficiency obligation schemes or alternative policy measures, and also regarding the targets, with a small caveat regarding energy poverty, I will explain later. Member states have the full flexibility to target those sectors which are the ones with the remaining energy savings potential, or yeah. Next slide, please. As I said, for us it was very important to ensure that also the Energy Efficiency Directive contributes to a just transition, and we provided in Article 8, but also in other provisions. So maybe it's worth to have a look also at other provisions, but in Article 8 also focus on vulnerable customers and energy poverty. We proposed to require member states to implement energy efficiency, energy policy measures under Article 7 as a priority among people affected by energy poverty, vulnerable customers, and where applicable, people living in social housing. To understand better the concept of what vulnerable customers means, it's also good to have a look at Article 22. So according to the Electricity Directive, member states are encouraged to set up a concept of vulnerable customers. And we didn't want to have and create a new category of customers, but we thought that it's to create a holistic approach to encourage member states to identify vulnerable customers. And for the purpose of the Energy Efficiency Directive, we also clarified that it's not only the customer, but also final users should be protected. So member states should also consider final users. So what is the difference? Customers, I think the term is quite clear in this regard. We assume that customers have direct contractual relationships to suppliers, for example, whereas final users, just think about multi-apartment buildings, don't have, not in all cases, have direct contractual relationships. So Article 8 in this regard should also be read together with Article 22 of the proposal. Then, of course, maybe it's clear for everyone, but it's also clarification that member states shall make best possible use of public funding with regards to vulnerable customers. So it goes hand in hand with the requirement to implement policy measures under Article 8 as a priority among vulnerable customers. We also convinced that renewable energy communities or citizens energy communities and also a network of experts can really support member states in designing the right policy measures, because we identified with regard to the past that it's from time to time difficult to target groups, how to reach out to those who are in the need. And finally, it's also a clarification that member states shall ensure, so pay more attention, that their policy mix have no adverse effects on vulnerable customers and people affected by energy poverty. As I said, we have the package approach in Fit for 55. So with regard to the Social Climate Fund, which is also part of Fit for 55 package, member states are really encouraged to use revenues from allowances from the ETS towards the implementation of energy efficiency measures, and also for Article 8. So it's not limited, but they could use the funding available to implement policy measures as a priority. Next slide, please. In Article 8, paragraph 3, you will find the requirement that member states should achieve a minimum share of energy savings among vulnerable customers, people affected by energy poverty, and of course, if it's the case in an individual member state, also towards people living in social housing. We require to calculate the required share on an individual basis, so there is no one-fits-all approach. Member states could either use, and that's the default option, the figure calculated regarding the households in energy poverty as assessed in its NECP. Or if this is not available, then we provided as an alternative indicators that could help member states to calculate the share needed. Just to be clear, it's not an extra share, it's a minimum share of the cumulative amount required for the period up to 2030. Next, just what I wanted to mention. You will find throughout the Energy Efficiency Directive new reporting obligations. We didn't want to spoil the well-working governance mechanism, but to be transparent and clear how the overall obligation should look like. We added reporting obligations. If the governance regulation will be revised, then we will also consider to move those reporting requirements to the governance regulation. Next slide, please. So what's new regarding obligated parties? Basically, member states, in case they wish to set up energy efficiency obligation schemes, they retain the full flexibility regarding the choice of obligated parties. We just added, it's not relevant for all member states, we just added the possibility to designate also transmission system operators. In some member states, energy intense industries are directly connected, for example, to the gas grid. And in case a member state considers it as an area for energy savings, then member states can now address also transmission system operators. What is new that we also tried to link the energy efficiency obligation scheme better to the social aspects and a just transition. So obligated parties may be required, of course, it's a discretion from member states, to achieve energy savings among people affected by energy poverty and vulnerable customers. We also clarify that member states can ask the obligated parties to work closely with local authorities or municipalities As said, it's up to the member states to decide, but we also identified that the work with the local and local level is heavily important to have successful schemes in place. And of course, we retain the annual reporting, but we added an annual reporting regarding the energy savings achieved among vulnerable customers. Next slide, please. So here, just a few words on key elements regarding materiality and additionality. We just clarified that policy measures which count or are eligible under Article 8 should also be designed and implemented for the purpose of fulfilling the energy savings obligation. So when designing it, the obligation should also be a reason why a policy measure has been implemented. Then, of course, it's also a clarification that member states shall provide evidence and documentation that the energy savings are really a result of an individual policy measure, which also includes voluntary agreements. And then finally, with regard to the new provisions in Article 5 and 6 of the draft EED, we clarified that member states may count those savings also towards the required amount of energy savings. So you just briefly, Article 5 now provides that that member states shall ensure that the public sector reduces its energy consumption, final energy consumption by 1.7% each year. And Article 6, which is the former Article 5, it has now been revised in a way that member states shall ensure that 3% of the total floor area is renovated each year. The difference is the current EED says it's related to central governments, and now we proposed to extend it to all public buildings. And if there are energy savings, there will be energy savings. Those savings can be counted towards Article 8. Next slide, please. With regard to the ETS, I mean, it's also in principle a clarification, as it is the case already now. Only energy savings achieved by a policy measure implemented under Article 7 can also count towards the required amount of energy savings. So since the ETS is union law, the additionality principle kicks in, but we clarified that the reduced energy use in sectors as a result of the EU ETS directive do not count as energy savings. And to ensure that, we also clarified the requirement on monitoring and verification. So it's crucial and will be important to ensure and to show that only energy savings from policy measures under Article 8 are taken into account. The next slide, please. So this is new in a way. We still maintain the approach that policy measures which encourage higher levels of energy efficiency of products, or for example equipment or vehicles, can count and are eligible under the energy savings obligation. Also the approach regarding early replacements or uptake of more efficient products and vehicles is maintained, but let me call it a sunset clause. We propose to exclude energy savings as a result of policy measures promoting the use of direct fossil fuel combustion technologies. So the word direct is crucial and important. We do not target indirect fossil fuel combustion, which means if electricity is produced also by means of fossil fuel, this would be question of indirect fossil fuel combustion. And we propose to have a sunset clause as from 1st of January 2024. So energy savings as a result of policy measures promoting the direct fossil fuel combustion will not be eligible anymore. Next slide, please. Regarding renewable technologies, we also receive feedback from stakeholders that it would be desirable to clarify the role of solar thermal technologies. And indeed, now it's clarified that solar thermal technologies might be eligible, but and this is not new. Member states should show that the energy savings are a result of this policy measure and are verifiable, measurable, or estimable. And then we also clarify that ambient heat captured can be excluded from the end-use energy consumption. Next, and I think last slide, please. Just a few words on taxation measures. You will find in the revised provisions a more concrete hint for price elasticities. As a default, short-run elasticities should be used for the calculation of the impact of a taxation measure, but it does not limit member states to use a different approach. So, for example, there are member states applying long-term price elasticities. This is still possible, but it would be important then to show how the energy efficiency improvements have taken into account other effects, for example, of union legislation or other factors that are relevant for calculating the impact of a taxation measure. And finally, last point, it's a clarification that studies shall come from independent institutes in case a member state provides or bases its price elasticity calculation on studies. And that's it from my side, and I'm happy to answer the questions you might have. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anne. That was very clear, and lots of amendments from the sort of high level right down to the detailed. So we've got a lot to get our teeth into, I think, over the coming period. I've just got a very, very quick sort of clarification question around timing. Do you have any view on what the timing is for the negotiation period and when eventually it might lead to adoption?
I mean, we just started with energy working parties in the council now, and so the Slovenian presidency really puts also focus, of course, on the Energy Efficiency Directive. There will be soon, end of the month, next working parties, and I think today we will know which committee in Parliament will be responsible for our file. This is also one important milestone. And I mean, from the deadlines, or you will see that we believe that we can start with 1st of January 2024. So since it's a package approach, I guess it will take a bit longer because you have to still take into account the synergies among the packages. And clearly, for example, the social climate fund is really important also for the provision on the energy savings obligation. So I guess, and that's at least the approach from the Slovenian presidency, also to make sure that it's also a holistic negotiation.
Great, thank you. Well, look, I want to start with a question for everybody on the panel. Well, actually, sorry, before we get to the questions, I completely forgot. We're going to have our 5-minute responses from our 3 panelists. So look, first things first, I'm going to hand over to Ariana Vitali from the Coalition 27. So Ariana, you've got 5 minutes.
Hi, Sam, and thank you for this invitation, and very glad to speak here and have listened to Anne-Catherine to this very detailed and comprehensive explanation of how the Article 8 works, and I hope that I'll be able to stick to Article 8 numbering when commenting. It's the Article 7 keeps slipping in all the time. And so I think, as other Sam has already mentioned, I think with the EU having agreed on the EU climate neutrality objective, it's clear that there is a need of a step change in policies, and definitely a step change in policies related to energy efficiency. There is the need of a paradigm shift on how the EU consumes and uses its energy in line with this new objective and the higher 2030 climate goals. So it's clear that as a coalition, we believe that the change in the regulatory framework is crucial to ensure this increased approach, and also to start with urgency in this decade to deliver energy savings and the relative greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So in that context, I wanted to comment on the level of ambition of the new Article 8. So I think the Commission has made the obvious choice of increasing the annual energy savings objective, because of course in the previous directive, that article alone delivered almost half of the saving of the old EED. So I mean, it's welcome that this the annual target has been objective, but I mean, I would like just to say something. 1.5% could seem a lot at the first time, as like a doubling of the current level of obligation, but in reality, the 1.5% is just the level of ambition that the Commission has originally proposed back in 2012, when the Energy Efficiency Directive was first proposed. And this was almost 10 years ago, and it was a totally different landscape. We didn't have a European Green Deal, nor a European climate law. So I think this puts into context this 1.5% at what it means. So as many of you in the panel and in the webinar remember, I think the 1.5% never materialized in the 2012 EED, because there were a series of loopholes and exemptions that were granted, and the article at the time only delivered a half of the savings. In 2018, with the Clean Energy Package, the directive was revised again, improved to some extent, and the target was set at 0.8. And now in 2021, we are basically back to square one when 1.5% is proposed again. And so I think this level is a minimum level, and we need to think that in that respect, we are in a different policy framework, in a different policy area, I would say, in which there is clear consensus that it's important to act on climate change, and there is important to invest on energy efficiency to support economic recovery and also to protect vulnerable consumers. So I would like to say that 1.5 is not revolutionary, it's something feasible, and actually more is possible. I think linked to this overall level of ambition, I think you also made an important point that we really welcome, is that when a member state does not achieve the annual cumulative energy savings in a period, we'll need to catch up in the subsequent period on top of the other obligation, and that's really positive. We have seen on the ED impact assessment and based on DG Energy own assessment of the progress report that there are several member states that are unlikely to meet their cumulative target for 2020. So I think it's positive that the recast proposal aims at providing a solution to close the gap if needed, even if this happens at a later stage. And then, I mean, for my introductory remark, I would like just to focus on another point, maybe something that that needs attention and that we'll need to check further. And so it doesn't seem that the proposal is doing enough to further encourage building renovations and long-lasting savings. I mean, we understand, as you mentioned, that the proposal creates two periods for implementing reason, with a new period starts in 2025, but we would like to understand whether this has an impact on rewarding short-term savings rather than long-term one, because that's, of course, is very important that we keep rewarding with Article 8, building renovations. I mean, with the Commission that has presented a renovation wave, with the EPBD that is coming, we really think it's important that Article 8 really encourage building renovations in terms of measures that are acceptable and should deliver savings. And I'll stop here for now.
Thank you, Ariana. That was very clear, and an important point you raised there with respect to the link with the renovation wave. Marine, I'd like to pass over to you now. It's Marine from the Next Energy Consumer. So over to you.
Thank you so much, Sam, and thank you very much, Anne-Catherine, for this excellent presentation. It's now very much clearer. So it's always really useful to have inputs from the European Commission. And of course, thank you so much, Ariana, for already stating a lot of points and making the link to the renovation wave. I would like to start by really congratulating the European Commission for acknowledging more concepts of energy poverty and vulnerable consumers, because that's what Sam asked me to talk about. And indeed, yes, I would like to give my congratulations to the Commission, because there are many inclusions of the term energy poverty and vulnerable consumers. There are many subtleties in the text that enlight the fact that the European Commission has understood that the energy poverty is not only a question of income, it's also a question of your background. For instance, energy poverty is also considered as something that can be related to your gender, your sexual orientation, or any particular personal factors in general. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that. It's acknowledged several times in the text, but the main innovation, I think, regarding energy poverty is really the inclusion of a definition with the Article 2. It's one of the latest paragraph 49, but that's really good that the European Commission is finally pushing for a proper definition. However, this definition has some flaw because it doesn't really include the question of cooking. And I don't know about you, but energy in my house, it's mainly used for cooking. And it also does not really focus on the affordability issue. And well, there might be a compromise to find somewhere. The second point regarding energy poverty that is really also really good is that, as Anne-Catherine mentioned, there is not only the mention of people that might be customers, like end customers with a proper contract, but also end users, so people without a contract. And that also means the people living in temporary housing or in shelters. And those people might not usually get the benefits that are really tailored for the people affected by energy poverty. So that's really good that we have like a broader understanding, a broader definition, a broader comprehension of the concept. Now, regarding really Article 8, it's really hard to make the switch, the language switch, but it's really important to see that the European Commission is now pushing for member states to calculate the number of people affected by energy poverty, either by pushing for this NECP definition or through the like, let's say, classical silk indicators that are the inability to keep home adequately warm, the areas on the utility bills, or the consumption expenditure per income quintile. However, I would say that this summer we had one of those terribly hot summers. It would have been quite appropriate to see something related to the impossibility to cool, and maybe some indicators on this. I know Silk hasn't been collected those data for quite some time, but maybe it's time to get back to it, because energy poverty is no longer a question of warming your home, but also cooling it. And you actually mention it in the definition of Article 2.49. So yeah, last point is that the fact that there is a minimum requirements of energy saving delivered through the energy obligation schemes, the EOS. However, the ring fence might be really different from one country to another, so it will be extremely tricky to implement something that is consistent enough from country to country. So yeah, I would like also to mention very, very quickly the extension of carbon emission trading to the transport and housing sectors. Here it's a big warning, because as we all know, the consumption for the housing sector or the transport is really not elastic. And we will already see quite some trouble this in the coming months with the increase of the energy bills. So I would really recommend the Commission to be extremely careful with that, because I wouldn't want the Parliament to be too black in the coming next elections because of bad reputation coming regarding not really well thought ETS scheme for this sector. So thank you, that was me.
Thank you, Maureen. Really important set of points, and I think we'll be returning to those when we go through the Q&A as well. So now I'd just like to introduce Peter. So Peter, former president of ECEEE and chair of the IEA's Energy Efficiency Working Party. Peter, over to you.
Thank you, and thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the good intervention from Karin and the others until now. I have been involved in the Energy Efficiency Directive since the first proposal in 2011. Was strongly involved in the negotiation in 2012 when we reached the first agreement. So this is something of my child here, so I really am happy to participate. I will start saying that we need more savings and a lower energy consumption in the future if we should reach the greenhouse gas target in a cost-effective way. And I also think I would underline that it's not only about the greenhouse gas targets. We also, in 2030, we also have to look until 2050, the net zero target in the long term. And if we should reach that long-term goal in a sustainable way, with not overusing resources and land and so on, a lower consumption are crucial, very, very important. So it's not only the 2030 target. I would also, from the beginning, say that if I look until what we have reached until now, it's very much the energy efficiency policies and the renewable energy policies who have delivered the reduction in the EU. It's not the ES emission trading system who has delivered until now. The prices have been too low. In the future, the emission trading hopefully will deliver more, but the regulation on energy efficiency and renewable energy are still very, very important. My third point here from the beginning is that EU are not on track to reach the existing target on 32.5%. And with the higher target, there is a substantial gap, so we need to do more. And common EU regulation, I'm very much in favor of that, the eco-design and EU regulation for vehicles setting CO2 targets, but they cannot deliver all the savings we need. So member states has to deliver much more. And elsewhere, we will not be possible to reach the 36% or 37 or 40% target, where we will end. Without member states doing more, we will not be able to reach the overall target. So that's my first point. My second point is that Article 8 is the main instrument to secure that member states deliver more savings. Almost all the other elements of the Energy Efficiency Directive and the EPBD can be counted under Article 8. And we just, and Katrine really made it very clear that all the obligation of the public sector, Article 5.6, can count here. So it's quite clear that without increasing the target here in Article 8, we will not be able to meet the overall target. So it's clear that we have to increase the target. So that's, but I will also say that it's very, very important to secure that the savings that member states claim as the way to reach the obligation in Article 8 are comply with the criteria for materiality and additionality. And I think until now that has been a problem. And it also, from a perspective, a bottom-up calculation of saving from each measure creates some problems. And even if it's done very well and properly, will that really reduce consumption in the same way, overall consumption related to a baseline without the measures? And I think so. We have to secure that there is a clear impact on the actual consumption compared to a realistic baseline on these things. That's very, very important for me. I think it's clear when we have a long-term perspective, we have to reach a net zero emission, and by that we have to phase out the use of oil and gas boilers and use of coal. And so it's also clear for me that savings from converting to a more efficient gas boiler or a more efficient oil boiler should not count. Of course not, because they have a lifetime of 20 or 25 years. So if we invest in a new one now, it will not get rid of them in time. So we have to stop that. So I really fully support that. And my final point, we have to secure the right social balance here, as we just heard before. But I think how that should be done will maybe be very different from between member states. Member states' regulation of social security and how much is that done by the taxation system, how much is those on social security system, and how much is that on energy policy are very different. But I fully agree that it's a really important element here. Thank you.
Peter, thank you so much. Lots and lots of interesting points you've covered there, actually, which some of those I think we'll be wanting to uncover in the Q&A as we delve a little deeper. I'd like to give Anne the chance to come back on any of those points if you'd like, and also just to let us know if we're able to circulate your slides to participants.
Yes, thanks a lot for all your feedback, and it's I think what Peter just mentioned also shows why a project like ENSMOV is very important. It's a one question to have higher targets or higher savings. It doesn't matter if you can also not achieve just 0.1. So that's why we really need to make sure to train, to provide also support to member states, technical support, financial support, that monitoring and verification is very working well, that the principle of materiality and additionality is well understood, that member states are the ones, and I also refer to the local level, that they understand how the baseline should be calculated, and these are really problems we identified, that this is not, let's say, self-explaining in itself, and that's why I'm really happy that also the ENSMOV project supports member states in implementing policy measures in a compliant way. With regard to the energy savings obligation, the 1.5, I mean, in the past, in the ED 2012, it referred to energy sales. Now it's referring to the final energy consumption, and also maybe that's crucial to see. Transport is not excluded anymore from the baseline calculation, so we have another starting point. It's true. I mean, you can just say, okay, it's not very inspiring to have 1.5, then 0.8, and then 1.5 again. But we just to explain a bit also how we calculated it. So for us, we took into account in the ED impact assessment what do current policies and measures achieve. So, and there we identified a gap. And then we calculated how to which amount of cumulative energy savings would lead, for example, 1.5. And as far as we calculated, and you can also find it in the EED impact assessment, it will amount to 645 MTUE in terms of cumulative savings up to 2030. And that was the reason why we suggested 1.5 as the preferred option. So I agree, you could also, depending on what your policy choice is, you could also go higher, but so the Commission then concluded that 1.5 is an appropriate level, which does not mean that member states must not achieve more. Of course, member states can go beyond. And also one important point you mentioned, Ariana, about the short-term savings. We really want to encourage member states to implement policy measures which create long-term savings. So although there is at least currently the cutoff date between the obligation periods, what counts for us are the individual actions under a policy measure. And so this is also a signal to member states. Long-term planning is very important, especially, and that's maybe also a question, where's the potential? Definitely in buildings, also regarding public buildings. And we hope that the proposal at least encourages to establish these long-term points. Also, with regard to the definition of energy poverty, we are also convinced that it's important to have a common understanding. It also reflects the claim from important stakeholders that it's helpful to have a definition on energy poverty. But we are always, let's say, we also always face the question, how concrete can we be? So we try to find a definition which does not limit the subsidiarity or the discretion of member states, respect the subsidiarity principle, but provides a common understanding. But I agree that one might consider a bigger focus on the cooling needs. Definitely, I would say this is also an important area. I hope the definition and also the provisions cannot be read in a way that it's excluded. So this was not the aim, but maybe also in later guidance notes we could clarify this aspect in more detail. And I think that's yeah, I would say my first feedback. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Anne. But before I move to the audience questions, and thank you so much for the first few that have come in, I just wanted to ask a kind of a really higher level question. I think you've all espoused the values of the higher target and why it's important, but I'm really interested to understand where you think more ambition should come from. What types of policies, how can they be more effective in delivering energy savings? Where do you see there's the most scope? It might be by sector, it might be by type of policy, it might be in the way they're implemented. Just interested to understand where you think the doubling, the virtual doubling of the savings rate is best delivered. And I'll go to Peter first.
Yeah, but if you look at the Commission's impact assessment, it's quite clear that a huge part of the extra savings should come from existing buildings, from energy renovations. So that's, and I also think that's true. I agree on that. But I can also see that from Danish experience, if we really push the transformation of the transport sector to electrical vehicles much faster, that could also deliver a substantial part of savings. And the transport sector in general, not only electrical vehicles, can deliver. So and we finally there's still also a potential in the industry and commercial sector. So, but renovation of existing buildings are quite important.
Thank you, Peter. Would anyone else like to come in? Ariana?
Yes, I'd like to pick up on that and totally agree with Peter that renovation of existing buildings, both increasing the rate and the depth of the renovation, is crucial, as already mentioned in the renovation wave. So that's clear. So maybe I want to give like an input on how to do it. And for me, this would be to try to break as well the silos of approach and not look at Article 8 as a standalone measure. So, of course, there is a lot of financing available now to the National Recovery and Resilience Plans that can be used to finance energy efficiency improvement, again, recognizing the role of energy efficiency in improving social condition, environmental, and for climate objectives. So, it should be important to find that member states find ways, of course, respecting additionality and materiality, but to put in place measures with this additional financing that could be used to finance Article 8. And here I'm thinking again, for example, to the example you made on the fact that the savings resulting from the 3% renovation obligations of buildings owned by public bodies can count for Article 8. So this additional money coming from the Recovery and Resilience Facility could be used to finance public buildings renovation that, if done in the right way, could contribute to meeting the Article 8 objective. So in a certain sense, a higher target is there, but there is also the possibility of combining policy mix, financing resources, and also expertise to achieve desired objective.
Thank you, Ariana. Marine, do you want to come in on this one?
Yes. I think it's really important to mention indeed the buildings and the existing buildings, and indeed to overcome the kind of silo approach. But we have to really acknowledge the reality on the ground, which is that many buildings might not be easy to renovate for many reasons, and they can be purely administrative because they are, let's say, unregistered parts in the building. So there are really complexity on the ground that makes me think that it's not really a question of money only. It's also about having the right people trained on the ground, having also the condominium managers that are taking hold on this, having the insurance companies that can decide not to cover the kind of risks because the place is not retrofitted. So, you know, it's really, it has to be a comprehensive approach and not only linked really to money, but to a whole system that can also include the health system, because poor buildings also are linked to poor health issues. So so it's really important to have this kind of broad perspective. And something important as well is to have, Peter mentioned the electric vehicles, but I think it's really important to have charging points within the buildings everywhere. And it's right now it's really hard to see them.
Thank you, Marine. It's really, I think you're really making the point about the non-siloization, if that's a word, of Article 8, and seeing it in the broader perspective of the package of measures that are going to be needed to deliver on the renovation wave and the emissions reductions in general. And it actually brings us, the point you just made there, Marine, about the people and ensuring that the right people are engaged, actually brings us to the first question I wanted to take from the audience. Which comes from Almut Bonhoff, and it's around the role of energy communities. She asked, is it not important to also address energy poverty? They can mobilize citizens to renovate their homes, citizen-led renovation, and why is their role reduced in tackling vulnerable households? So that's a specific question around energy communities. I don't know whether anyone would like to come on that one. Mary?
Ariana, go.
Yeah, I can pick up on this briefly, and I think that's an extremely important point. So, of course, as Anne-Catherine already mentioned, there is the possibility of energy community as well to being acknowledged and recognized in their contribution to meeting the Article 8 objective. I think that's an important first step, and more can also be done in order to ensure that rather just and acknowledging their role, we could maybe need to find a way and a clear way in which those energy community and energy cooperatives can contribute to renovations. For example, we know that when citizens are part of an energy community, normally they they also meter the savings that result from the renovation, so they also have a clear monitoring and verification approach of the savings, so that could be further improved, and the role for the energy community can, it's important that it's acknowledged and can be further deepened in the directive.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone else want to come in on that point?
But I would say if we, in relation to renovation of existing building and reducing consumption, it is also very important to have focus on the awareness and how people live and how people use the buildings. We can see that if they if a building is renovated and they increase the indoor temperature and they do the ventilation in the wrong way, then they will use much more energy than they should do. So information, awareness raising, training to the people who live in the buildings are very, very important. And it's not only about incentives and metering, or they have to understand what to do.
Thank you, Peter.
If I can comment on that, indeed, it's really important that people know, and that maybe being involved in communities allow for the information to circulate. But it's really important to be careful with the burden that lies on the shoulders of the people themselves, of the end users, because they might not know, they might not even be aware of the existence of communities. So you shouldn't really rely only on communities to do the work or perform the work, or you shouldn't rely only on people willingness to join the community to start doing something. So that's why communities are a channel, but it's not the only one, and there has to be many. And I would say that one of the crucial points are really one-stop shops, and working with social organizations, working with the social services within the municipalities to help to reach the people who need it most, and not only the ones who are or could be interested in making some improvement in their home. Because if you are living in a certain place, you might not even want anybody to visit your place to see how it is in practice. So just imagine having to do some kind of improvement work. It could be really heartbreaking for you, because you would have to move temporarily to another place. So it can be really emotional and something complicated to implement in practice, and we have to be extremely sensitive to that.
Thank you. And I'll give you the opportunity to come in this one if you want, or we can move on to the next question. We've got lots to get through. Okay, well, look, we'll move on. So look, I wanted to ask something actually around the link to the climate objectives, and we have a couple of questions also coming in on this point. And I thought Peter's point around net zero was really valid here. And indeed, if you look at the IEA's recent report on how to reach net zero 2050, they were really clear that, you know, if you look at a sort of technological trajectory, you shouldn't be selling any new gas boilers by 2025. And so, you know, you could read that the changes, the proposed changes to Article 8 in that context, as sort of following that kind of trajectory by not allowing savings from direct combustion in fossil fuel using technologies to qualify for savings by 2024. I just wondered whether any of you had any points you'd like to raise around the role, I guess, of this article in driving decarbonisation. I mean, let's face it, it's probably, we're talking really mostly here about heating technologies or cooking technologies, indeed, in buildings. I just wondered whether you had any views on the role of Article 8 in actually delivering on the decarbonisation of the building stock, as opposed to just improvements in its energy efficiency. Peter.
Yeah, but I would really stress that if we should reach our long-term goals, we have to do, first, we have to reduce consumption in buildings and industry and so on by improving the insulation, our windows and so on. And secondly, we have to decarbonize the supply. I'm very nervous that we've moved all our focus to decarbonize the supply and saying if a building had a heat pump, or then we don't need to improve the insulation and reduce the demand. That's not sustainable in the long perspective. So the only focus on greenhouse gases and emissions are very, very dangerous. So we have to keep a focus on energy and energy demand too. So very, very important for me.
That's a good point, Peter. Does anyone else want to come in on this point? Because I do have a specific question on this that's come from the audience.
I would just like to add, I would also see Article 8 as a chance and an invitation to consider other sectors with regard to resource efficiency, what also Peter mentioned. So I guess, of course, where's the potential in buildings and transport? No question. But for example, it's also possible to count energy savings from improvements in the water sector, for example. And that's what is also important to think about other sectors member states have not considered yet under Article 8. So in this regard, I would also agree it's not only about decarbonization, it's also about resource efficiency or how to use the solid. It's also important, and I would fully agree that that's why we need energy efficiency policies as a self-standing and policy area on equal footing.
Thank you, Anne. I'd like to move to a question from our audience on the direct fossil fuel combustion point. So this comes from Karen Herbstritt, and they ask, on direct fossil fuel combustion, does that include or exclude CHP? So this is actually probably a question for Anne. It's very, very specific.
I mean, CHP, since it's also based on gas, then it's considered as fossil fuel, so it would fall under the rule for direct fossil fuel combustion. I think there are also biomass CHP, but I think it's not a common. So to be brief, yes, from our perspective, it should be excluded.
Great, thank you. I've got another question around the link to the climate objective. I completely take Peter's point that energy efficiency has multiple benefits, and so we shouldn't just obsess about the climate target. But when we look at the package, we do see a big change in the climate policy architecture, particularly with the ETS2 coming in, so the emissions trading system for buildings and transport, which will cap emissions in these sectors. And given that that is the case, do you think that that will have an impact on the energy efficiency policies that are put in place by member states? One could argue that maybe the rationale for the policies may change, or because of the effect of the ETS2, a different set of type of policies might be required in order to fit with this new part of the climate policy architecture. I'm just interested to know whether you think that the energy efficiency policies that will be reported under Article 8 might change as a result of ETS2 coming into play.
Well, if the policy might change, maybe I'll leave it to Anne to answer that. I was more thinking from a stakeholder perspective, the fact that the Commission has proposed this extension, but has clearly maintained and even strengthened energy efficiency regulation. It shows the need to have really a complementary approach, that even if you have a high carbon price, there are non-economic barriers to energy efficiency that cannot just be solved like that. So I think that's an important point, and it's an important acknowledgement that was possibly not given few years ago. So I think that's positive. Also, I think the fact that in Article 8 there is this provision that try to exclude the accounting of the savings that come from a higher carbon price if they are not resulting from specific measures to count for the objective of the article is also positive. A question will be to see, as you already mentioned before, how well the monitoring and verification methods will be able to make this distinction of what is counted and what is not counted. And then maybe just another final point on the complementarity. I think we need to also to see the positive point of the higher carbon price, that there are ETS revenues of the possible new system, but also of the old ETS that can be used again, to finance and alleviate the negative social impacts that ETS could create on the vulnerable consumers. And that, for example, would be really using these revenues to target the people in need, to help them renovate the house, to help them going through the renovation hassle, to help them providing information. So there is all of that also I think it's important to consider when discussing about that to have the full picture.
I don't see that the ETS2 will have a huge impact on Article 8. There where I would be a bit more nervous is, could it have an impact on the revision of the EPPD? There will be some people who are arguing that we don't need double regulation. If we have economic incentives, we could make the regulation weaker. I don't agree on that. We need both the stronger economic incentive by the increased prices from the emission trading systems, and we need regulation. The market and prices will not by itself deliver enough savings. People who argue that way don't understand how energy efficiency work out in reality. So there is a lot of other market failure barriers, problems, so which we have to overcome. So we have to have regulation. We maybe have to have subsidy schemes and information campaign and so on to reach our targets. So we need both ETS and regulation. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I think most people in the energy efficiency community would completely agree with that. This combination of pricing, regulation, and supporting instruments is generally what is required. Thank you. I've got one other question actually related to the direct fossil fuel combustion point from Just Gerdes, who asks, would hybrid heating systems be excluded as well because of being partly fossil fuel based? For example, a combination of a gas-fired boiler and an electrical heat pump.
I mean, so what we, if it's possible to allocate energy savings to the part which is not direct fossil fuel, for example, in renovations, it can be to change the building envelope, but also to, I mean, member states are still free to promote fossil fuel heating technologies. But if energy savings from building renovation as a broader term would be claimed for Article 8, we would not accept the part on the replacement of a boiler with a fossil fuel based boiler. So, and in this regard, I mean, if it's a mix, I think it's a good question. What about if it's not possible to distinguish between the energy savings? I think we first need to discuss internally, but I think the clear message should be do not promote direct fossil fuel technologies as of 1st of January 2024.
Thank you, Anne. That's very clear. I am going to also just return to one of the previous questions. We have a follow-up question from Jean-Sebastian Brock around the energy communities point. And he asks whether any of the panel are aware of energy communities involved in building renovations. Most examples he's heard of are around on-site renewables, and most of the cases are about installing PV panels because there's a direct revenue that can be shared there. And that probably makes PV panels potentially being installed before energy efficiency measures are done first. So I just wondered whether anyone has some examples, I guess, of energy communities going forward with energy renovations.
Yeah, just to mention that one of the members of the Coalition for Energy Saving is RESCOP, that really deals with energy communities and energy cooperatives. So I think what they report when talking about how their system works is, of course, that most of the time those communities start with renewable energy provision, but of course, as soon as you produce your own electricity, for example, there is an immediate attention also to saving this energy. And that's why those communities start in many cases with renewable energy, but at the same time they put in place as well renovation of existing buildings to couple the renewables installation. So I think you can check more on their website, RESCOP, and you will have a specific example there.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you, Ariana. Anybody else want to come in with an example? No. Okay. Well, look, I've got I'm going to bundle a few questions here together about the kind of around the target that have come in from the audience. So, I've got a question here from Martin Verdonk. So, what is the calculation basis for the new target to save 1.5% annually? How does the target relate to the new Article 4 target? I think you've kind of covered that already, actually, haven't you, by explaining that it's subsidiary to the Article 8 target, i.e. they may count. But perhaps a sort of a more fundamental question: why may savings resulting from policies not specifically designed for Article 8 are ineligible? And that also comes from Martin. So I'd like to ask Anna perhaps if she might ask that one. At the same time, I'm going to bundle another question from Juice Guedes around whether reducing demand through lifestyle change is also possible in meeting the Energy Efficiency Directive targets. And a final one, also from Juice, is around whether there are fewer exceptions in Article 8 than in the current Article 7 that effectively lower the effective savings goal. So a bunch of questions really around the target level, and if you wouldn't mind just answering, if that's okay. Thanks.
I mean, why is it important to show that the policy measure was implemented for the purpose? First, I mean, we are discussing about energy efficiency and all know that it's important to raise awareness. So, and if member states consider policy measures, it's also important during let's say, in the parliament, when having stakeholder consultations or citizens consultations, it's also important that initiatives are communicated for the purpose of energy efficiency. So just an example, and this has not always been the case, taxation measures are often used as a measure under Article 8, but they were not explicitly designed for the purpose of Article 7. So we expect that also by communicating it better to the citizens in each member state, that energy efficiency will be of a better awareness in citizens. And it's also a question of materiality, or for example with taxation measures, of elasticities, how it's calculated. So to put it really in the context of energy efficiency, and what we do not want to have is energy savings by accident. So we want well-targeted policy measures, and that's why it's a clarification that policy measures should be implemented for the purpose of achieving energy savings. And I think that's one point. Yeah, lifestyle changes, I'm not sure if I got it right. I think you can count almost all energy savings as long under Article 8, if it's a behavioral measure or information campaigns leading to lifestyle changes. But we still wish to see that they are calculated in accordance with the calculation requirements. So, and maybe also back to what was discussed before. I think with the ETS, it's also a question of how the greater spotlight on Article 8 or the energy savings obligation. Member states already know and have experience, as Peter said, it's his baby. He knows it since many years. And member states can already now start promoting energy efficiency improvements to soften impacts from, for example, increasing electricity prices, as it's now the case, or from upcoming ETS on transport and building. So that's also one message. Don't wait for the revision of the EED or if the ETS kicks in, start now, and everyone will benefit from early actions. And with regard to the derogations or if they're exemptions, just one word, I'm not sure if I meet the purpose of the question, but we also try to simplify the energy savings obligation a bit. So we propose to that the alternative calculation approach ceases to apply as from 1st of January 2024. And with regard to this, also there are some exemptions, if you wish. They were not real exemptions because 0.8 were the net savings required, so it's kind of hidden. The derogations were not really needed, but so we try to simplify Article 8, and that's why we also try to propose something which is more or less exemption free, because exemptions simply complicate things.
Thank you, Anne. I've just got a quick intervention from Benigna Bozakis, who says that you may know that Energy Neighbourhoods Projects, it's an EU project, started in 2011, continue in Hungary, and I think there's a similar initiative in Belgium. And these are delivering behavioural changes, so not investment in energy efficiency changes, but still some demand-side solutions from energy communities. Look, I've got one final question that I'd like to put to you all, really, and it stems actually from something that Peter said earlier on, which was around materiality, additionality, MRV, and sort of worries about whether these provisions are being adhered to. I mean, as an observer of the energy savings obligation, I would say that reporting on these things has improved a lot as a result of the directive requiring member states to think about these issues. And while compliance is not perfect, it's certainly improved. However, where I think the directive perhaps lacks some teeth is around the measurement of the energy savings themselves. So a lot of the reporting is around the actions that have been delivered, but not the savings that have actually been delivered. The savings are often estimated through ex-ante, deemed, scaled methods. And then there's very little evaluation of the energy savings done ex post to find out whether those deemed, scaled, ex-ante estimates were accurate or not. And if we want the energy efficiency first principle to be implemented, then we need to be able to compare the costs and benefits of energy efficiency policies against alternative policy measures that may also meet some of the societal objectives, particularly around the energy system. So I wondered whether any of our panelists had any views about how the directive could be strengthened, or member states' actions could be strengthened in order to improve the certainty about the energy savings that we're actually getting from our energy efficiency policies. So would anyone like to comment on that? Ariana?
Yeah, maybe very briefly. I mean, I guess in that point that were made by the previous panelists about the importance of checking the quality of the savings. I mean, as a coalition, together with our members, we were proposing as well that there would be a periodic assessment of national programs and savings that are done by an independent entity. And this would allow at the national level to check the quality of the savings and to check that the savings are delivered. So a kind of auditing approach of the savings to ensure that those really materialize. And there is also transparency and on how they are accounted for. And so member states are also at the end of the day more accountable in all that process.
Thank you, Ariana. Anyone else want to comment on this last point? Peter?
Yeah, I think I would first say that first step is to improve the ex-ante reporting and measurement of the savings. And here I today maybe are coming to this, my view that we need to supplement the bottom-up calculation of each measures with a more top-down approach, where set some guidelines for developing a baseline without the measures, and then a forecast with the measures, and see that is a difference there equal to what we have found by the bottom-up calculations. I think that is also a way to secure that we have no double counting and so on. So I really I think that's maybe the way forward, and I think most member states are able to do that. But and then after onwards, I also agree that to do in the coming energy and climate plans, that member states has to look backwards and see has the savings really been delivered. That's of course also important. I agree on that.
Thank you. Marine?
Yes, I think that compliance is really important at all levels. If companies and businesses are involved, they have to be the measures have to be extremely strict and rigid towards what they have to achieve. And I think it's also a question of how we implement the European climate law, because at the end of the day we all get back to it, and how the European Commission and how the Court of Justice can also kind of put the spotlight on bad practices as well. I mean, no one wants to be at the end of the list.
Thank you, Maria. Well, look, thanks everyone on our panel. We've reached the end of our time. And if you've got anything you wanted to say before we leave, then now is your chance. Okay, hopefully we've given you lots of food for thought through the panel and through the questions that have come. I apologize if your question didn't get asked, but I think we got through most of them. And this has been a really, really interesting session, and just really the start, I think, of the discussions that are going to be going on over the coming months. So my thanks to Anne for the presentation, to the rest of our panelists, Peter, Marine, and Ariana for their contributions. Thanks to the audience for your questions, and until next time, goodbye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.